Now, why would it be really beneficial for there to be no footage of the event? Well, because then it's this airman's word against the military. And I can promise you, the airman is not going to win in that battle. Welcome back to the channel, everybody. And in a wild turn of events in the story of the airman who was killed by a Sig P320 recently, the Air Force has now arrested a second airman who's being charged with the death instead of the 320. And guys, this just smells real fishy for a lot of different reasons. Okay. So I'm just going to give you guys my speculation because, yeah, the military and SIG, they've got no motive to make this go away. Right. Right. So let's jump into it. Let's talk about it. Let's see what's going on. Don't forget to like, comment, and subscribe. Definitely helps the channel. Follow us on Patreon. Grab some merch. First thing we're going to do, take a look what's actually happening. So, Air Force makes arrest in airman's shooting death involving M18 pistol. The Air Force has arrested an airman in connection with the July 20th death of another airman, which involved a Sig Sauer M18 and led the service to suspend the use of the pistol following the incident. In a Friday statement, a Department of the Air Force spokesperson said that the unidentified arrested person is accused of making a false official statement, obstruction of justice, and involuntary manslaughter. That is going to be very important to the story here in a little bit. Okay, so Air Force Global Strike Command pulled the M18 pistol use after Braden Lovin, a 21-year-old remote targeting engagement system operator in the 90th Security Forces Group at F.E. Warren Air Force Base, which is going to be extremely important, in Cheyenne, Wyoming, was fatally shot with that pistol. All right, so we're going to talk about all the sketchy stuff around this story, okay, because there's a lot to it. But the first thing we're going to talk about is incentives, okay? Everyone involved in this story is highly incentivized, whether it be the military, whether it be SIG, whether it be this airman who's being charged. So let's talk about incentives, okay? Let's talk about the military first. Does the military have a massive, massive incentive to make this story in its original form, which is the SIG P320 is a dangerous duty pistol for soldiers to be carrying, to go away? Oh my God, yes. Because if you think about this, guys, we're going to talk about the SIG contract here in a second. This contract is massive. It spans 10 years. And if you think about what the military would have to go through if they had to come out and say, yes, this pistol is unsafe for duty use, they would have to defield, decommission all of the M18s in the entire military. They would then have to get a new contract with a different supplier, who would then have to drum up millions, potentially, of whether it be Glock or Walter or whoever, to then supply the entire force. That is going to be an absolute logistical nightmare for the military. So, if you could, I don't know, blame this on a single airman, not to say that, again, we'll get into the story a little bit deeper here, it would be highly beneficial, because then the military gets to go, see, it wasn't the weapon, it was the person. Carry on. We don't have to deal with anything else. Okay. Second incentive, Sig Sauer. Why is Sig Sauer so incentivized to make these things go away? Well, let's take a look at this. What's the contract actually look like? Here we go. Sig Sauer has multiple contracts with the U.S. Army, the most notable being a potential 10-year, $4.5 billion contract for the Next Generation Squad Weapon Program. This contract includes the production of the XM5 rifle, XM250 automatic rifle. Additionally, Sig Sauer has a separate $600 million contract for the modular handgun system. So we're talking about, yes, $5 billion contract that potentially goes down the toilet or goes to somebody else if this story potentially is true in its original form. Now, we got to be fair both ways. Does this airman who has been arrested have huge incentive to tell the story in its original form? Just like any officer or military soldier whose weapon is negligently just discharged, whether it be an uncommanded discharge from the weapon it's not, or however, yes, of course you want to blame it on the gun, not yourself, right? So you can absolve all personal responsibility off of this and put it on the 320, okay? So Again, incentives from everybody here to make their story the correct story. But next, we're going to talk about just why the Air Force doing this now, 2 weeks later, in the way they're doing it is just so sketchy to me. But before we do that, give me 60 seconds of your time to talk about today's sponsor. All right, before we jump back into the video, guys, got to give a quick shout out to today's sponsor, and that is Black Forest Supplements' new product, cocoa flavonoids, designed to jack your natural stem cell production up. Guys, if you're like me, you're beat up, bunch of surgeries, your recovery, best thing for it, stem cells.
Last 2 years, I've been getting stem cells, and it's been the best thing that has ever happened to me in my life.
How much is it?
$2,800
Per
injection.
All right, but the problem is you can't get stem cell therapy done here in the country. You got to go outside the country. It's crazy expensive. So that's why I'm taking Black Forest Labs cocoa flavonoids.
Drinking the hot chocolate twice a day over the course of a month, they doubled the number of stem cells compared to the people who didn't drink hot chocolate.
All right, guys, so I've been taking this for about a month, definitely noticing really good recovery, but also really noticing improvements in my cardiovascular capabilities, right? Improves your cardio performance, your heart health, boosts your nitric oxide levels, right? All great things. I take mine in the morning with coffee, and also, guys, next 48 hours, my link in the pinned comment and description, going to get you 40% off. So head over there and grab yourself some cocoa flavonoids. All right, so let's talk about all the stuff that makes this such a sketchy story and why I just think the Air Force is probably full of shit here. All right, first thing, the location this happened, okay? F.E. Warren Air Force Base, which, as we can see here, what is F.E. Warren Air Force Base? Well, it's the Air Force's Nuclear Weapons Center. The Air Force Nuclear Weapons Center is the nuclear focus center within Air Force Material Command, AFMC. It synchronizes all aspects of nuclear management on behalf of the AFC commander and direct support of Air Force Global Strike Command. So this place controls a ton of the nuclear weapon systems across the entire country. Why is that relevant and important to this story? Because supposedly, when this was first announced, the location on the basis happened was at a security desk inside, wherever that may have been. Well, guess what? You're talking about a nuclear facility that controls most of the nuclear weapons in the United States. This is like the most secured facility, military facility, you're probably going to find anywhere. What does that mean? There's cameras everywhere, especially at a security desk. Now, why is that so suspicious? Well, to me, it means there is video evidence of this and people have seen it. So you got to ask yourself, when this very first happened, why did the Air Force, their very first action was to immediately, an hour later, put out a memorandum temporarily banning the use of the M18 pistol? Their initial actions were not to arrest this soldier. So the way I see it is someone looked at the camera, saw something happen, went, oh shit, and that's why they made the decision to put the memorandum out when they did. And we don't get an arrest till 2 weeks later. Very, very odd. But something happened in that 2 weeks that sort of changed everything. And this is what it was. This is very important. It says here, after Levin's death, the Air Force paused the use of the Sig Sauer M18 handgun. The M18, a version of the Sig Sauer's P320, has faced allegations it is prone to going off without having the trigger being pulled. And here we go. Levin's family had planned to file a wrongful death lawsuit against Sig Sauer, alleging the gun went off without a trigger pull. Sig Sauer, based in New Hampshire, defended the P320 and M18 in a July 29th statement, calling them one of the safest, most advanced pistols in the world, and asserting they cannot discharge without the trigger being moved to the rear. The Air Force is now calling the incident isolated, with no broader threat to the base or community. So we're back to using the pistol. Now, why would that be such a big deal if the family of a U.S. airman filed a wrongful death lawsuit against Sig Sauer and potentially won that lawsuit? Ooh, that could potentially have what? Completely fucked Sig Sauer out of that military contract. However, now if the Air Force UCMJs this soldier and he's basically convicted for him being at fault, there is no possibility for that family to file that lawsuit against Sig. Isn't that convenient? All right, but we got to talk about the timeline. The timeline is also really important because, again, like I mentioned before, the first initial reaction from the Air Force was not to arrest the soldier, but to simply put a temporary ban on the use of the weapon. So what the military is going to, or the Air Force is going to have to tell us now is one of a couple things. They're going to either have to show us the footage, and if they can show us the footage, sure, great. That'll solve all the problems because we know there probably is footage, right? But if you saw the footage and you saw this soldier doing something negligent, why'd you put the memorandum out against Sig's pistol in the first place? Because you would have automatically just saw, like, oh, that was negligent by the soldier, not the weapon. It doesn't make sense unless the military and this is what I think they're going to do, is going to try to tell us that there is no camera footage of the event. Now, why would it be really beneficial for there to be no footage of the event? Well, because then it's this airman's word against the military. And I can promise you, the airman is not going to win in that battle. So, what do I think really happened here? Okay. And this is full speculation. I think multiple things are true at the same time here. What I think probably happened is that this airman, as he tells the story, is probably true. He comes into the office, he takes his holster off of his QLS, he puts it on the desk, pointing at a fellow airman. The gun goes off, shoots that airman in the chest, and that story most likely happened. What I also think, if we look at the charges, which again are involuntary manslaughter. Okay, so the Air Force is recognizing this was not some murder where he walked up and purposely shot his buddy. With involuntary manslaughter, they're saying this is some type of negligent accident, right? And so what I think they're going to do is charge him with manslaughter and negligence because he put the weapon down pointed at his buddy, which breaks, the second universal basic safety rule, technically, even though a holstered weapon is in safe condition, not if it's a 320, obviously. But the Air Force and the military will be able to say that that was a negligent accident by him placing the gun down facing another soldier. And if they can charge and convict this airman with a wrongful death and involuntary manslaughter, then this will absolve the military and Sig Sauer from any wrongdoing, even though the pistol continues to be unsafe. Now, again, total speculation, but based off of the charges, based off the timeline of events, right, the military is saying this was a accidental death with the charges. This is the only story that really makes sense to me. But who knows? What I don't think is we're probably not going to get a whole lot of real information out of this, and that's just going to be the way it goes. The military is going to burn this airman in the ground, and we're probably just going to wait and see another event like this happen over and over and over again. But let me know what you guys think in the comments section. Right? Do you trust the 320 now because of one individual event potentially not being what it's claimed, or do you still think the weapon system is just as unsafe as it's ever been? All right, that's gonna do it for this one. Catch y'all on the next one.